Good evening, everybody.
Couple Tov, how are you?
Thank you, Baruch Hashem. So we're starting with Gimel today. It says like this: Katu got memory on the It says this rabbi, Beshem Samag, in the name of this rabbi, Shemutar lalush bayain, afa pi she'i efshar layain belo tipat mayim. שנופלת בשעת הבציר. אף על פי כן אין לחוש הועיל וכבר נתבטלו. I think this one we already did. 1 second. We did this one already. Yeah, so we're going to Hay now. Not Gimel. Here we are. Okay, so it says like this. Katab b'tur yorodea siman shin chavtet. It says in the tour, in a different place, that Isa shenilosha b'me betzim o b'yain v'dvash b'lo shum mayim katev Rambam shechayvet b'chala. Oh, so right, then now we get into a different issue, different angle here, right? Which is that when you make a dough and you use, right, these three liquids that we spoke about already, which is, right, eggs, and we talked about wine and honey, right? So he says the question is like this, and you don't add any water to it, right? No water at all. The question is it obligated to do challah? Right? Is it obligated to do challah on this kind of a dough? To take challah? So the Adoni Azal haya mistapek b'davar. So he says the Rosh, my father, he says, had a doubt regarding this. כתב וטוב להיזהר שלא לרוש יישא במי ביצים. So he says, right, that good idea to refrain from making a dough with the eggs לבדן by itself, ולא תערובת מים without any water, כדי לצאת ידי ספק. So he says, in order to avoid this, getting into this doubt that we just mentioned, so he says, therefore, avoid making this kind of matzah altogether. So again, right, what does that mean? It means don't make egg matzah, right? That's what he's telling you. Even though nowadays, as we said, right, they do make them actually. You can go to your local supermarket and buy it there. But, right, the Rosh recommends not to do it. And what's the reason why? Because there's a doubt whether it's obligated to take challah from there or not. Okay, interesting. So he says, goes on, ולפי זה בפסח שאי אפשר לרוש במי ביצים עם תערובת במים, ילוש יישא משיעור חלה. So he says, פחות משיעור חלה. So he says, therefore, in order to solve the problem, says Bet Yosef, what do you do? To get around this issue, get around this problem, right? What do you do? So he says, you get around it by making the dough small, relatively, right? In other words, don't make it large enough that it should be liable in challah. That it should be obligated in challah. So if you do it that way, right, there won't be any questions, right? It's going to be absolved from challah anyway, right? Either way. either because it's made out of eggs or because it's too small. So either way, you'll be fine. So that's a convenient solution, right? If you want to make egg matzah, make small batches, right? And this way you won't have a problem. That's what he's saying. Okay, that's the story there. Interesting. So as we already mentioned right before, what is the size of challah that you have to take challah from the dough? It's 3.5 pounds, right? So if your dough is 3.5 pounds or more, then it's obligated to take challah. Otherwise, it's not obligated. So therefore, right, to make it 3 pounds, whatever, right, or 2 pounds, then you're good. You're good to go, right? Okay, good. So then he goes on a bit, Yosef. Katub Samak, right? It says in Samak, Siman Reishutet, in this chapter, Rabbi Natanel haya makpid b'mei betzim כשהיו לשין העולם שיעור חיוב חלה. So he says, right, that this rabbi, he was stringent, or he was right. Yeah. What does that mean? That if you're using, right, as we said, eggs to knead the dough, שהיו לשין העולם שיעור חיוב חלה מפני שהיא טהורה שמי פירות אין מכשירים. So it says, right, that this rabbi was particular. Okay, about what? That if they would make the size which is obligated for challah, as we said, 3.5 pounds, right? Because so he says the reason is because it's pure, doesn't get impure. Okay. Because he says, right, that the fruit juice doesn't prepare the dough for impurity. So the truth is, nowadays we're not really concerned about pure and impure because we're all impure anyway, right? So this doesn't really have any practical, application today. But anyway, right? We'll read through it, whatever it is. ומה יעשו? מחלתה דאף אגב דעכשיו בזמן הזה שאין לנו מחטאת, אין אדם טהור מטומאת מת מכל מקום, כיוון שנילושה בביצים שלא הוכשרו בשום משקה, אינה מקבל טומאה, ואם כן, מה יעשה מחלתה לשרפה? אינו יכול, כיוון שהיא טהורה. So he says, but there's still a practical issue here, even for us, right, that we don't care about pure and impure. There is a practical issue. So what is it? So he says the practical issue is like this, that since, what we do usually, right, when we make a dough, and it has a size to take challah, so what we do is we burn the challah, right? Why do we burn it? Because we can't give it to a kohen. What's the reason why we can't give it to a kohen? Even though legally it belongs to him, right? Halachically speaking, belongs to him. He should have it. But the problem is that because it's not pure, right? So you can't eat challah in impurity. But here he says, right, but wait a second, right? Didn't we just say that when you make, right, a dough with fruit juice, it doesn't require impurity. So therefore it's still pure. So what does that mean? That means that you can't burn it. Why can't you burn it? Because it's edible, right? The reason we burn it is because it's not edible, right? Because it's one impure. But here it's pure, so how are you going to burn it? That's what he's trying to say, right? That's his question here. So the question is, how do you handle that, right? What do you do? Okay, interesting. ואם כן, מה יעשה במחלת השרפה? אינו יכול לכיוון שהיא טהורה, וגם לאוכלה אינו יכול. So he says, either way you can't do it, right? In other words, on the one side, you can't burn it, as we said, right? Because it's kosher to eat. So you can't just destroy something which is, challah, which is kosher. You can't do that. And on the other hand, right, we can't eat it either. So you don't have either option, right? Whether to burn it or to eat it. Why can't you eat it? Right? So he says the answer is because most people today are impure, obviously, right? 99.99% of us are impure. So then how are you going to eat it, right? That's the question, right? So you don't have any options, right? That's the problem. Okay, interesting. So he says, right, that the solution would be to give it to a kohen who is a child. Like it says in Bechorot, כ"ז עמוד א', עד כאן לשונו, ודבר פשוט הוא שכל שאלה שעיסה במי פירות שאינם משבעה משקים, דין אכלה כדין עיסה של אשה בביצים. So says, right, the Bet Yosef, in the end, he concludes, right, regarding this issue. He says that it's very clear that what? That if you knead the dough with fruit juice, and it's not one of the 7 liquids, right, that are problematic with this issue. So he says then for sure, the rule would be, right, that just like the rule would be the same as if you kneaded it with eggs. So fruit juice and eggs would be the same. Okay, interesting. That's the end of the Bet Yosef. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch. Right, hopefully he'll be a little bit more clear about this, right, this issue, a little bit more, right, simple and clear. So let's see what it says, right? Yeah, very simple and clear. That's what it is, exactly. So it says, me betzim v'shar mashkim kulam havu bichlal me perot. So he says, right, that sorry, this is not the one. We got to do the next one. This is Dalet. This we did yesterday. Okay, this one, right? So he says, halash isa b'me perot tov le'asota pachat mishur b'saron k'dei shelo yitchayev b'chala. So he says, right, the proper thing to do, right, if you're kneading a dough and you're using fruit juice, right? So the proper thing to do, he says, is to make it, as we said, right, not too large. What does that mean? Don't make it 3.5 pounds and more, because why? If you do that, then you have to take challah, and then you have a dilemma, right? What do I do with this challah, right? What do I do? Can I can I burn it? No, can't burn it. Can I give it to a kohen to eat? No, can't do that either, because he's not pure, right? So we said, right, the solution is to give it to a child who's a kohen. That would be the only solution, right? But nevertheless, right, that doesn't usually, that doesn't always come up. That's that kind of solution, readily, right? Looking for a Kohen child somewhere, in your building, right, where you live, in your neighborhood, right? Not always readily available. If you really look, you can find, but depends on where you live also, right? Depends on what kind of area you live in. But anyway, right, the point is that what he's saying is like this, right? That therefore, the proper thing to do in order to avoid this dilemma altogether is to make it small, the dough, right? Not 3.5 pounds, less. And this way you won't have obligation for challah, so you won't have any issues. This is the way to avoid it, right? So, as we said, right, this only applies to when you're making the dough from fruit juice, right? But if you're making the dough from water, you got no problem, because then you can take the challah, right, and just burn it, right? That's not a problem. So that won't be any issue. Okay, very good. So we're done with that. Let's go to the next one, which is Vav. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay, so here we are with Vav. It says in the Bet Yosef, right? You know what? We got to read the tour first, because we didn't read this yet. So let's go to the tour. Yeah, so it says the Torah like this. Hilkach chita shenimtzet bedevash, right? If you found a kernel of wheat, right, inside the honey, or beyain, or inside the wine, the chometz, or it says also vinegar, right? Mutar bil, you're allowed to have that. Why is that? Why are you allowed to have it? Anybody know? $1 million question.
It doesn't leaven
Why? Why?
because there's no water in it. No, it's
Exactly.
just
Beautiful.
wine.
Okay, there you go. Right. Okay, we'll send you the $1 million in the mail. We'll ship it out to you.
Okay, I'll be
So,
waiting.
okay, we'll Zell it over to you. Zell. We'll do Zell. Okay. So, so that's the story, right? That as you said, right? That it'll never leaven. So therefore, if you found wheat like that, right, which is in one of these liquids which don't cause leavening, right? So then you're good. You can have that wheat. No, you don't have to throw it away. Right. Okay, that's good. So let's go on. Goes on. Right, but it says as long as there's no water that got in there, right? There was no mixture of water there. Okay, good. So I guess that's the end of it. Let's see the Bet Yosef now. It says Bet Yosef, explaining this tour, Klomar kivan deme perot en machmitzin, right? As you said, right? That since the fruit juice doesn't leaven, mishum hachi mutar lalush bahem lechatchila. Therefore, right, according to the Sephardi custom, right, lechatchila, you're allowed to knead with that. No problem. Right, as we said, Ashkenazim are stringent, as we said, right? They only give it to the old and the the elderly and the sick, right? Whatever. So Hilkach chita shenimtzet bedevash. So he says, right, that therefore, if you have, as we said, okay, that's the tour. So then he says that mutar, right? Katav ken mishum Yerushalmi. So he writes, he says, the source for this is in Yerushalmi. Ika kama emora'eh the asru. So he said because over there are some rabbis who forbade to have that wheat, right? The Katav Rosh, prepare kolsha. So says the Rosh that the Sfira Lu Kabaye. So why did they forbid, right? We said it's allowed. So then why did those rabbis in Yerushalmi they forbid that? So they hold like Abaye, the me perot machmitzin. They hold like Abaye. That Abaye holds that fruit juice does leaven, So if you hold like that, right, then it's a different story altogether. Mishum achi asa chatzava de abishuna ve'anan kaimalan kirava de sharet. But he says we don't hold like that, right? Abaye. We hold like Rava, who says that fruit juice does not leaven, right? So therefore, right, that's halacha. Okay, that's the Bet Yosef. Good. Let's go to Shulchan Aruch. So as we said, right, it says Shulchan Aruch, chita shenimtzet bedevash. If you find wheat in the honey, or beyain, or in wine, or bechometz, or with the vinegar, mutar, right? That wheat is allowed, as we said, doesn't leaven, right? As long as what? That there's no water mixed in there, right? Otherwise, it's going to be a problem. Okay, very good. That's well. So let's see if we got anything else. So it looks like we have a little bit more here. So we'll go back to Bet Yosef, see what's going on there. We got to do Zayin. So it says, there's also a tour here. So let's go to the tour. So it says the tour. So it says Matzati Katuba. I found written, right, She'im nimtzet bemelach chita. What about if you found, right, wheat in the salt, right? Meluchlechet machamitz. So it says, if that, right, wheat is moist, it will leaven. Why is that? Ki hamelach mitoladat hamayim. So it says, right, that that water, right? I'm sorry, that salt comes from water. There's some, in other words, it's a derivative of water, basically. So therefore, right, who ve'eno bichlal mei perot. So it says, therefore, it's not going to be like fruit juice. That's not the same thing, right? It's a different thing altogether. Ve'eno nirali. So it doesn't seem right to me. He says, tehal sharinan v'vatikad v'mishcha or milcha alma demei melach have bichlal mei perot. So it says the two, right? I don't agree with this. It says I hold that salt water is like fruit juice. In other words, it doesn't leaven. Interesting, right? So okay, we have a machloket over here regarding this. So the Torah seems to be lenient, right, and says it doesn't leaven salt water. So therefore, if you found wheat, right, and salt or salt water, right, it will be okay, according to that. So let's see how the Bet Yosef paskins here. All right. So it says Bet Yosef, Perush Vatika Kemach Mevushal. So he says, what does Vatika mean? So he says this is a right, it's flour which is cooked. Ve'aminan bepek kol sha'a. So we say in this Gemara in Lamed Amud Bet, de b'maya umilcha asur, that it says there that water and salt is no good; it's forbidden. But mishcha umilcha sharet. But if it's right salt and oil, it's okay. So he says v'diek Rabbeinu mishum de melach en bo torat mayim. So he says the Rabbeinu, the Torah, right, deduced this because that right salt doesn't have the designation of water. The im loken litzar abal, because otherwise it should be forbidden. Abal Haran katav sham, but it says the Ran writes there, velo asinan le mishum milcha. Says we don't forbid it because of the salt. Shehu kemayim, because it's like water. Umeorav im hashemen, and it's mixed with oil. Because it's a little bit. It already changed, right? That's exactly what we said yesterday regarding the mixture of wine and water also. So he says it doesn't really have the strength with the oil, together with the oil. In other words, the oil overpowers it, right? It nullifies it. But it says when it comes to like real water, like pure water, right? Then we're concerned. Even a little bit. Nami says it's also possible that if there is salt, there's a lot of salt. This is maybe we're going to be concerned because then it's going to be already, too strong. Okay, so then he goes on. So that's all the opinion of this rabbi. Because he writes over there, so look what he says, right? That a person should sift out the salt, right, prior to Passover. Why is that? Mechitim, right? Because just in case there's some wheat in there. There should be no wheat. Right? So this is why, because once the salt gets moist, so it goes a little bit, right, penetrates into the wheat and it gets leavened. So what do we see from here? Right, first of all, by the way, this doesn't apply to us, this thing. So what does that mean, right? Don't now go sifting out the your salt, right, for Passover. You don't have to do that. There's no reason, right? Because you're afraid there's some wheat in there, right? Today, there's no wheat in the salt. Right? In those days, they had issues like this. Today, we don't have it. What's the difference, by the way? Why don't we have it in our times and they had it in those days? Wheat, and the salt. How does that work?
We process the salt.
I'm sorry, what was that again?
We process the salt in an industrial way modernly. We remove the iodine from it.
Okay. So in other words, you're saying we purify it, or it's already purified.
Yeah.
Okay, that may be true. I'm sorry, what were you saying?
Maybe because of the sacks that they were carried on.
Right. That's exactly what I was thinking. You read my mind, right? That the problem was in those days they would reuse the sacks, again and again, for different products. So that's why, they would take the sack that they use for wheat and then use it for salt, So that therefore you could have some residue from the wheat left over, right? That's the thing. So, that's also true, by the way, what you're saying, Michael, that today, everything is nice and processed, and purified, I mean, usually, right? The problems are much less in the factories. But anyway, right, this was the problem that they had. And by the way, you should know that this, we already discussed this, but I'll tell you again, right, that this is the reason why the Ashkenazim don't eat kitniot on Passover, the legumes, because of the sack problem, right, as we just discussed, right? They use the same sacks for rice and wheat, and they get mixed in. That's why they stopped eating rice to the Ashkenazim.
Well, what
So
you're saying about the salt and the water, they create a pickling effect. When you're looking at like koshering the meat, that's why you have to use dry salt and not a mixture of salt and water, because it says it pickles. So maybe it does the same thing to the wheat.
yeah, right. Yeah, no, but right. You're right what you're saying. But here we're talking about something else, right? Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. One more. Let me answer that again. Right. The truth is, what you're saying is correct. That's exactly what we're concerned about. What we're concerned about is that the salt gets moist, with water, and then it'll penetrate into the wheat, right, and cause it to leaven. It's pretty much what you're saying, more or less, I think, whatever. So, similar to what you're saying. So that's the problem. That's why we have this issue. And that's why he wants you to sift it out, right? But as we say, right, today it's not necessary. Because you're not going to find, today, wheat in the salt. Right? It's not going to happen. Okay, very good. So that's the story there. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch. I think this is the last one here. Yeah. So it says in Shulchan Aruch, יש לברר המלח קודם פסח מחיטים שלא יהיה בתוכו, right? It says you should sift out the salt, right? As we said, from the wheat, before Passover, right? As we said, today we don't need that, right? כי כשהמלח מתלכלך, הוא נכנס מעט מעט בחיטים ומתחמץ. So as we said, right, the problem is that once the salt gets moist, it penetrates into the wheat, right? That moisture, and could cause it to leaven. Okay, very good. So I think that's the end of the chapter. Yeah, we're done. So let's bring up the new one. Maybe we can start it. Let's see how big it is and see how what we can do. So the next chapter is Taf Samech Gimel, right? Which is 463. Okay, so what does it say over here? מותר לחרוך בית שיבלים ביחד, ולא חשינן שמא יצאו מים מאחד מחברתה, ותחמיץ דהבה לה מפירות, ואין מחמיצין, הלקח ותיקה שהיא תבשיל. Interesting, right? So interesting what the Torah says here. It's not really so relevant to us because we don't do these kinds of things, but anyway, we'll read through it, right? Just to be scholarly, we'll read through it anyway. Right. So it says here that you have 2 ears of wheat, right? The stalks, right, with the ears of wheat. So in other words, that's the way they grow out of the ground, right? That's the way they look. If you've ever seen that, right? So, so he says you can singe 2 of them at a time, right? 2 ears of wheat, right? The wheat stalks, right? So why would you think it's a problem to do that? right? Because he says, right, that you may think we're concerned that the liquid, right, the water, which is inside one of them, will come out and go into the other one and cause it to leaven. So he says, but that's not so. Not so. This won't happen, right? And the question is, why not? So he answers, right? The answer is because it's considered to be like fruit juice. So what does that mean? It came out of like, a food, right? Which is the wheat, which is also, kind of a fruit kind of thing. So, grows out of the ground. So, therefore, right, it's fruit juice, the water that comes out of the wheat, and therefore will not cause the other ear of wheat to leaven. There you go. Okay, so that's what he says. יילקח ותיקה שהיא תבשיל עשוי משמן ומלח עם קמח שרה, אבל העשוי ממיץ ממים ומלח עם קמח אסור. So he says, therefore, right, because of what we just mentioned, if you're making, right, a certain kind of a dish, right, it's what's called vatika, right, which is probably some kind of a porridge, something like that, right? So he says, how do they make it? They make it with oil and salt, right, and wheat, right? Not wheat, I'm sorry, flour. Right, so he says it's allowed. And what's the reason why? Because as we just said, right, that we're not concerned about the juice that comes out of the wheat because it's doesn't leaven. So that's not a problem, he says. But if they use water instead of oil, then it's a problem, right? Because then that water will cause it to leaven. So that's going to be a different problem, different issue. That's a different issue. So, okay, good. So that's the tour. Let's see Bet Yosef. Let's see what it says there. So it says Bet Yosef, he just brings the source over here, right? Klukta de Abaye ve'Rava bePerek Kol Shah, right? It's a machloket, dispute between Abaye and Rava. Where is this? In the Gemara, right? Mem Amud Aleph. Kaimalan Kirava de Share, right? So it says Bet Yosef, we pass like Rava that allows this, right? To eat this kind of a dish, to make this kind of a dish on Passover. Okay, good. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch. So says Shulchan Aruch, mutar lacharoch shnei shibonim biachad, right? As we said, right? You're allowed to singe or whatever, to toast them, to roast them, whatever. 2 ears of wheat together. What's the reason why? As we said, right? The reason is because this is like considered like fruit juice since it comes out of the wheat, and therefore will not leaven, right? So one will not, right? The juice from one of them will not come out and leaven the other one because it's fruit juice. So therefore it won't leaven. Okay, that's the story. Very simple. Okay, let's see what else we got here. Bet. So it says Bet Yosef in Bet, as we said, right, that this dish, which is some kind of like a porridge or something, whatever. Not exactly porridge, because porridge is made out of wheat, right, or whatever. This is made out of flour, but something like that, right? Something similar. They're using oil and and salt and flour. So that's okay, right? What's the reason why? As we said, right? Because we're not afraid that this will leaven because of the water that comes out of the flour or whatever. Right? So he says Yosef, Gam ze sham ukvar nitbaer b'siman shekodem ze. He says, we already explained this in the chapter before. Interesting. Right, regarding this. Okay, good. So let's see the Shulchan Aruch. Let's see. Says Shulchan Aruch, Vatika shehu tavshil asui mishemen umelach im kemach. Right, as we said, right? This vatika is a dish which is made out of flour and salt and oil. Mutar behu shelo yeh bo maim. But he says it's only allowed when there's no additional water in there, right? But if you put water in there, you got a problem. Why is that? Because the water will cause the flour to leaven. This is your problem. So says the Rama here, Udidan shenohagim lachamir be'mei perot gam ze asur. Look what the Rama says, right? This I didn't realize. Something new, right, for the Ashkenazim here. Which is, right, he says the Rama that since the Ashkenazim are stringent about fruit juice, right, they don't make matzah with fruit juice, as we said, except for the old and sick, right, as we mentioned. So he says this would also be forbidden then. So meaning what? That since they don't use fruit juice, they also don't want to use wheat juice, right, which is the same thing in halacha. So don't make me any wheat juice, right? Any wheat juice dishes for Passover, right? If you're Ashkenazi, right, it's a problem. That's what the Rama is saying. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know.
What's a wheat juice dish?
What's wheat juice? Okay, what that means is, right, that the wheat has the wheat has moisture,
Yeah.
so you can squeeze it and it'll come out. Just like any other, whatever, like most foods, or whatever, they have some moisture inside.
Yeah.
That's what I'm calling wheat juice,
It just sounds funny.
Yeah, it's funny, yeah. So that's the story, right? That's what we have over here. Okay, I guess we'll stop here. B'ezrat Hashem. We'll continue tomorrow. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth and health and happiness. B'ezrat Hashem. Chazak u'baruch, Laila Tov. And okay, we're only 2 weeks away from Purim. So make sure you got everything ready for Purim now. You're getting ready, right? There's not really much to do yet, right? It's still a bit early, but get your barbecue ready, right? And you're make sure you have enough bottles of wine. You got to drink on Purim, if you can handle your drink, right? You can handle your drinking. If you can handle it, you got to drink. If you can't handle it, you get crazy a little bit, whatever. Don't drink. Better not to drink. Drink a little bit, right? Not too much. Okay, Laila Tov. We'll see you tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem. All the best.
Kavod Harav, thank you so much.
Bye.